Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. As we are about to host an event which is associated with the Conference of Parties, the 26th convening of the Conference of Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, otherwise known as COP26. We are part of the Virtual Oceans platform, and we are happy that you are here as we seek to address an aspect of what has been labeled, what has been defined as a clear and present danger to our existence on this planet, not only as human beings, but also the different forms of biodiversity as well. My name is Eden Charles, and I'm the chairman of one of the advisory committee of One Ocean Hub, United Kingdom Research and Innovation. We have decided to be a sponsor of this event simply because we believe that the ocean is life. And when we discuss matters relating to climate change, we must factor the influence of climate change on various aspects of the ocean as we see it today. But you may want to ask, what is One Ocean Hub, of which I have the honor to be the chair of the advisory committee? My dear audience, One Ocean Hub is an international program of research for sustainable development, working to promote fair and inclusive decision-making for a healthy ocean whereby people and planet flourish. One Ocean Hub is funded by the United Kingdom Research and Innovation through the Global Challenge Research Fund, which is a key component in delivering the United Kingdom's aid strategy. It is led by the University of Strathclyde in Scotland, and the hub brings together 126 researchers from 21 research partners in the United Kingdom, my region of the Caribbean, Ghana, Namibia, South Africa, and the South Pacific. The hub also brought together 18 project partner organizations, including the United Nations Environmental Program, UNEP, the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, and the United Nations Division for Ocean Affairs and the Law of the Sea. What are we about to discuss over the next 1 hour and a half, 90 minutes? This roundtable session, my dear colleagues, friends, well-wishers, will explore the need for collective UN and global organizations' interventions to build ocean resilience in the face of climate change, using appropriate sustainable mitigation and adaptation strategies for states and the governance of common, and I emphasize common ocean goods and services. Common, which means they cannot be owned, they cannot be become part of any national jurisdiction. They are common ocean goods and services. And the key question I want you to keep in your mind, my dear audience, all over the world, is how can United Nations agencies strengthen synergies, facilitate, and better deal with climate actions and their strategies and policies? Why are we emphasizing this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are, the importance of this multilateral, interconnected nature of the UN and other global bodies? Because One Ocean Hub recognized is, and our supporters as well, that notwithstanding bilateral arrangements or other arrangements, as we saw yesterday in that meeting of the G20 in Italy, where the level of achievement was not what one expected, we have to now rely on the wider COP26, this Conference of the Parties, the 26th edition, to see whether or not we could deliver for our planet measures aimed at addressing adaptation and mitigation and climate financing and so on. In our particular instance here, as far as the oceans are concerned, recognizing that the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was negotiated under the rubric of the United Nations, so too was the Paris Agreement and so on. The One Ocean Hub has brought together experts in various fields who will help us navigate, offer solutions and best practices, global best practices, in an effort to address what we are seeking to achieve. The first part of our program will feature presentations by some leading spokespersons, scientists, specialists in the area. Then we'll have the UN bodies intervene. We'll be followed by a discussion, and then there'll be responses based on what you may want to ask. And we request that you, as it were, seek to put your questions or comments in the chat feature, and then we will follow. Now, I have said more than enough that I should say as opening speaker, as chairman, and I now wish to invite Dr. Shan Rees, Associate Professor of Social Ecological Systems of the University of Plymouth, to address this topic of strengthening ocean resilience through interaction with UN bodies and so on. Shan, let's hear from you, please.
Great. And can you see my screen there as well?
Yes, we are seeing your screen.
Lovely. Okay, well, thank you very much for the invite to speak today. It's a huge privilege to be able to speak at this event and give you some initial thoughts on the academic and applied perspective of ecosystem services and climate change. So as you are well aware, and why we're all here, is that nature provides us with everything we need to both thrive and survive. And this is one of the original figures from the Millennium Ecosystem Service Assessment that I always like to show, because it describes how life on Earth, so that is all of the biodiversity, it actually functions to make available a series of ecosystem services. And the overarching premise of the Millennium Ecosystem Service Assessment is that if these ecosystem services are available and we have sustainable use and fair access to them, then we have the constituents that underpin various elements of human well-being. In today's presentation, and as part of the discussion in COP26, we're interested in the role that natural systems have in the ecosystem service of climate adaptation. So this is things such as flood defense and climate mitigation, which is things or habitats that contain and absorb and store carbon. Now, salt marsh and seagrass and mangroves are the most well understood systems in terms of their role in climate adaptation and mitigation. In fact, they're the only blue carbon habitats that the IPCC has published guidelines for inclusion in national greenhouse gas inventories. What we do know is that their annual carbon sequestration rate per hectare per year of these habitats is actually greater than that of tropical forests. But these areas, the salt marsh, the seagrass, the mangroves, they're actually fractional in size and spatial coverage than their forest counterparts. So they actually have quite a minimal role in climate mitigation strategies, but this really does not negate any reason for holding back on protection and restoration efforts. So, for example, the storm and flood defense services as ecosystem services are an essential lifeline protecting property and coastal communities around the world. There are also multiple stacked ecosystem service benefits that comes from protecting biodiversity. And this includes supporting multiple levels of the food chain that can lead to food provision, to the bioremediation of waste, and also to cultural services, however they're described, but recreation and tourism are an example of these. So their inclusion in climate adaptation and their inclusion in the climate mitigation and adaptation debate is still very important. Their protection with MPAs or other protected area strategies should absolutely remain a priority for increase. Now, the condition of these habitats is essential to the actual level or the amount of ecosystem service that is available. So the condition of habitats through monitoring and assessment of MPAs is something that we really do not have a good handle on at present globally. And so this should also be a priority to get localized but globally scalable information on the status of the extent and condition of these vital habitats. I will give seaweed a quick mention. So seaweeds are globally the most extensive and productive vegetated coastal ecosystem. They also provide multiple stacked ecosystem service benefits. And seaweed aquaculture is also highlighted and discussed in this climate mitigation debate. So whilst undoubtedly part of the carbon cycle, the amount that is actually sequestered by these seaweed habitats is not known and may actually be quite low. But what we do know is that carbon is exported through this productive cycle and will cross national jurisdictions. So whilst we may be thinking about area-based management for things such as salt marsh and mangroves and seagrass, when we're thinking about carbon export cycles, any adaptation and mitigation strategies linked to marine systems is essentially a global concern. Now, two habitats here also linked to carbon include temperate reef. Well, I include temperate reef from my part of the world, and merle, which is the habitat below. And what we know is that merle is a calcifying seaweed that also sequesters carbon, and the physical structure of merle means that even beds that have died actually still sequester and store organic carbon, provided that they are not physically damaged. So the same is for reef systems as well. So restoration and protection of these through marine protected areas is important. Seabed trawling over sensitive habitats means they take decades to recover, if at all. And this not only reduces the ability of these systems to play a part in the carbon cycle, but also reduces or removes the option of anyone else to benefit from these systems. My last slide is about mud. Now, continental shelf muds, whilst we don't often talk about them in conservation, and they do have a lower sequestration rate than some of the other habitats mentioned, they show great potential in the carbon story because they cover vast areas of the ocean. And this is here in these muds and these sediments where the carbon conversation actually really opens up. Of course, there is a global system of sediment transport, but any real impact in climate adaptation and mitigation will come from including sediment areas in climate smart marine spatial planning, extending to areas beyond national jurisdiction. What we need is a system that enables a management of carbon stocks across these vast areas of seabed, that integrates fisheries management as a key tool, includes controls so we can understand pressure reduction for carbon biodiversity outcomes, and ultimately within this system of climate smart MSP and decision support, we need the needs of humankind as a whole need to be prioritised. So my last slide is just two publications that we have contributed to and that summarise much of the evidence that I've just presented to you. So I shall wrap up there and hand the screen back.
Thank you most kindly, Sean, for your very important presentation looking at adaptation and the importance of spatial planning and the effects of climate change on the continental shelf. It is so important to states within 200 nautical miles national jurisdiction, beyond 200 nautical miles becomes the area which is part of the common heritage of mankind. So I hope that you are keeping your questions or your comments on Sean's presentation. And I now have the honor to move to a colleague of mine from the One Ocean Hub, Dr. Bernadette Snow. Bernadette is the Deputy Director of the One Ocean Hub. Bernadette, we'll have you now. Bernadette.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the introduction. And I will start my presentation, and I'm going to take a view linking it to what Sean has spoken about with regards to taking a systems approach. So I'm going to start off with theory of change. We talk about the ocean we want and the goals and targets we want to achieve in terms of climate mitigation and adaptation. We can have a theory of change that looks at it as a linear process. If we do this, this will happen. If that happens, that will happen, and so forth. I'm advocating for taking a systems approach, and as Sean mentioned, being part of socio-ecological systems, the interlinkages between human well-being and the environment is extremely important. So therefore, one of the first observations that I would make here is that we should go for a systems approach, and I'm going to illustrate how we have applied a systems approach in the Western Indian Ocean towards developing a strategy for a marine spatial plan. So this is the theory of change, and I won't go through it in deep depth and detail, but I'll take one example. So if the system itself is at a regional level, and we need to create that enabling environment, which needs to include stakeholder capacity, development and building and understanding what we have, institutional, technical, as well as human resource capacity. Within the whole Western Indian Ocean marine ecosystem, we need to look at regional planning and how this will inform national planning in terms of area-based planning, as well as informing the marine spatial plan as an adaptive and strategic approach. So taking one of the examples, we say no regional measures to deal with connectivity. So Sean spoke about connectivity between the marine biological in terms of carbon cycle, but waters move all the time and create connectivity as well as transient species like turtles and sharks. So for example, we look at the connectivity not only between the sea and the ecosystem, but also the people in the sea and the land in the sea, as well as the migrating species. If we tackle it from a systems, we would look at that we need regional measures, regional guidelines and policies to make sure that this connectivity is maintained. Again, the benefits of a systems approach. So within the UN perspective, we need to have these global as well as regionally applied measures, guidelines, and policies where it can play this particular role. Explaining this a little bit further in detail. So drawing the system, and I'll draw out here just one aspect because it can be quite detailed and seem complicated. But understanding the system and looking a little bit more closer at ocean protection. First, we would identify what are the levers for change? What do we need to enhance regional ocean protection or even global ocean protection? In this case, what's identified by the stakeholders, managers, scientists, and community was that they need to look at stock management and planning, protect ecologically and biologically significant areas, and also looking at areas beyond national jurisdiction, acknowledging the connectivity. Taking this further, once we have identified what are these levers, what are the implementers or enablers, so taking our system and pulling on it a little bit further, and then focusing here again on just ocean protection, using ocean accounts in terms of understanding how to manage, what is the sustainability, what is the use, what is the coverage, and adapting accordingly, we can then look at both stock, at the IPSAs, as well as the ABNJs. Importantly, it's also recognized that there needs to be binding multilateral agreements, that sometimes voluntary guidelines are not sufficient. And for stock management, we can look at different tools, area-based tools, and technology to assist in the process. So from our experience as a hub, and some of the work that we've been doing at the international level, particularly led by Professor Mojera, is looking at human rights. Now, human rights is central to the One Ocean Hub's work that we are doing. It's the central lens that we view ocean protection, ocean management, ocean governance through. With working with different UN bodies, while working with UNEP in particular around the human rights and the rights of the child, blind spots were also identified that we were not looking at oceans. Oceans are left out. Then also we work with FAO in terms of rights of small-scale fishers and looking at the voluntary guidelines, connecting this blind spot between UNEP's work and identifying that oceans need to be included in some of these processes in terms of environmental defenders, and working with FAO in terms of small-scale fishers and community. They are identified as ocean defenders already in place. And these ocean defenders already undertake climate action and activism in violations of their particular human rights. This was brought together under a discussion through another UN body, through UNDWALOS, during World Ocean Week, where these discussions and the different organizations came together and presented a roundtable debate around these particular issues around human rights and ocean defenders and the need and for inclusion of oceans in these discussions in different UN bodies. Another outcome of this is at the moment an upcoming report that is being prepared by UNEP. There is no date, but what it will look at is this notion or the ideal of ocean defenders as these environmental defenders of the ocean space, and mapping out the different mandates of the UN bodies to achieve this going forward. So what are the key messages in terms of the role of research to policy to impact? First of all, the role of a researcher could be as a neutral science policy broker. We also bring innovation to the table with new and innovative and different approaches of engaging with stakeholders. One of these will be presented at another session in the COP26 program as an event later on in the week, is looking at empatheater. This is a critical space where we can negotiate and resolve conflicts using arts-based methodology. And also through our research, it's not only these different tools and processes bringing in transdisciplinary work, but it also allows us to look at how we can work across scales from UN agencies down to communities and from communities into UN agencies. We also have the opportunity to identify these blind spots or missed opportunities for collaboration and working across the different UN mandates. It also allows us to bridge this international and local level, which is really important, and taking it from there. I'm actually going to leave with these key messages, and I'm looking forward to the debates and the discussions going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you most kindly, Bernadette, for an important presentation. And what I like about the presentation is the fact that you are indicating that national approaches must be built on regional input, must be built on global input, and the importance of legally binding commitments as opposed to politically binding commitments. And legally binding commitments would also bring to before the issue of implementation. And if there are breaches in implementation, how do we address breaches? And I also like the issue of human rights, because when we speak about climate change, sometimes we do not look at the effect of these dastardly anthropogenic activities which cause climate change and how they impact, for example, on fisher folk, the right to earn a living, the disappearance of their livelihood. So I think that is an important debate, and we shall pick it up in more earnestly in the question and answer period. I now want to call upon Professor Lisa Levin, Distinguished Professor of the Scripps Institution of Oceanography at the University of California, San Diego. Lisa?
Thank you. Today, I would like to talk about the UNFCCC Ocean and Climate Change Dialogue submissions that occurred last year and how they highlight the climate-ocean biodiversity nexus. This is work that just was published a couple of days ago in Climate Policy, and I need to acknowledge the first author, Bobby Jo Dobush, and then all my co-authors on this work. So as part of the UNFCCC climate dialogue early last year, there was a call for submissions to the dialogue on ocean and climate change. And there were 47 submissions. 20 of these were from parties, and about 5 of them were from large groups of countries. And then 27 were non-party submissions that included a whole range of NGOs and academic institutions, and also several UN system entities, along with the IUCN. We conducted analysis of what themes emerged. Well, let me back up and say that this dialogue represented a very important forum for the party, non-party co-design and collaboration of what are very often siloed areas of climate, ocean, and biodiversity. The Ocean Dialogue submissions demonstrated a political evolution towards the acceptance that climate policy must address linkages with the ocean and its biodiversity. And we analyzed the emerging themes. You can see many of them here. These are themes that were mentioned by over 50% of the submissions, except for human rights, in fact, which we just heard about, which wasn't mentioned much. But all of these themes are highly interconnected, and some, like finance and capacity building, really crossed over into all of the other themes. There was very broad recognition of the impacts of climate change on the ocean and marine ecosystems. You can see warming, ocean acidification, sea level rise got a lot of mentions, but so did flooding and impacts on coral reefs and mangroves and species migrations. Almost all of the submissions mentioned ocean management for biodiversity in some capacity, ecosystem resilience, biodiversity protection, ecosystem-based management, MPAs, and marine spatial planning, and more. And these all involve many different types of UN agencies that I've depicted over here on the right. Again, most of the submissions mentioned ocean-based ecosystem services, with fisheries coming out on top, mentioned by more than 3/4 of the submissions, but there are many other services mentioned as well. Over 85% of the submissions mentioned greenhouse gas sinks and nature-based solutions, including blue carbon. And again, these involve many different agencies to allow these to be considered. And science featured prominently in the submissions. There was a lot of mention of scientific research, the IPCC special report on ocean and cryosphere, and ocean observing and monitoring. But some of the other science assessments were not mentioned much, and there's clearly a need for coordinated science assessments. The IPBES report and got about 30% mention, and the World Ocean Assessment was only mentioned by 2 submissions, despite the goal of having this assessment influence policy. So we need more coordination of the sort reflected in the recent IPBES IPCC joint workshop on biodiversity and climate change. And one question is whether these different assessments and under the auspices of maybe the decade and UN agencies can come together as an intergovernmental panel on ocean change. This has been proposed by Françoise Guy and others. There was a broad call for multilateral interactions among agencies and instruments, and you can see mention of all these different UN agencies that you'll be hearing from in this session. But the truth is that the policy instruments that underlie these UN bodies are very siloed. And in a recent analysis that I participated in with lead author Laura Ellsler, Mary Weiss, and others, we looked at the intersection of climate and biodiversity through a keyword search, defining what we called the ocean carbon focus factor, and in fact found only 3 policy instruments that have this high intersection: the Convention on Migratory Species, the London Convention and Protocol, and the International Convention on Whaling. But many of the others, BBNJ, CBD, UNCLOS, and the Fish Stocks Agreement and others, are very much siloed as climate or biodiversity, but not considering the intersection. It's very clear that there are new opportunities for the ocean to provide climate solutions at this intersection of ocean, biodiversity, and climate. There are many proposed open ocean mitigation measures. There are climate smart spatial planning and MPA design, and climate smart fisheries management that, to actually be carried out, will all require the involvement and coordination of many, many different UN bodies. So I'd like to close by simply suggesting that to implement strong stewardship and good governance of the blue planet in a disrupted climate, the UN agencies will need to work together, and they'll also need to work with scientists, including a variety of scientific networks, such as those I've shown here, and hopefully the UN Ocean Decade can help with this. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I really enjoyed your presentation. And what struck me is that notwithstanding the importance of UN agencies, who you say sometimes work in silos, and there should be coordination of, let's say, UNEP and DOLAS and so on and so forth to tackle climate change. You also referenced very early in the presentation the importance of civil society involvement in all the submissions which were made, and that's critical. That's very critical. I also like the fact that you dealt with capacity building and finance. Very, 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 very important, especially for developing countries, who sometimes lack capacity, and because of lacking capacity, they are unable to implement either politically binding commitments or legally binding commitments, and very importantly, the issue of climate finance. So I believe your presentation leads us very nicely, succinctly as well, into the other part of our program where we hear from legal bodies, UN bodies, which have a role to play in this particular issue of climate change and the oceans. And I'm going to put on Dr. Joanna Post. Joanna is Program Management Officer for Research and Systematic Observation of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Secretariat, a very critically important portfolio. Joanna, let's hear you, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Eden. It's a pleasure to be here with you virtually today. I'm actually sitting in the COP venue, and so very much involved in these very important negotiations here in Glasgow. I am actually, during COP26, the acting manager for the Collective Progress Subdivision here at the FCCC Secretariat, and we are a cross-cutting team supporting science policy, interfacing the negotiations, coordinating the global stocktake, and importantly for our discussion today, supporting and coordinating the ocean climate work in our process. Ladies and gentlemen, at COP25 in Madrid, parties under the UNFCCC accepted the science on the ocean and cryosphere as outlined in the IPCC special report on the ocean and cryosphere and a changing climate, which had just been released that year. Parties then considered in Madrid in end of 2019 the action that could be taken. And so at COP25, parties mandated the sub-chair to hold the Ocean Climate Change Dialogue to consider how to strengthen adaptation and mitigation action under our process. And as Lisa very nicely pointed out, she did the analysis of what was discussed there, but I want to talk a little bit more about some detail that applies very much to the conversation we're having here about strengthening cooperation and collaboration across the UN. The informal summary report from this dialogue was made available by the subs to chair from our process earlier in this year. And I encourage you all to take a look at that summary report, which has some key messages from the dialogue. But one of the 4 discussions at the dialogue, which actually took place last year, early December, was looking at how to strengthen cooperation and collaboration among relevant UN bodies on the ocean and climate change. Parties and non-party stakeholders, it was a wide range of engagement, but everyone agreed that adaptation mitigation measures for ocean systems should be aligned across ongoing action across the UN, providing a framework for collaboration and coordination. And this, of course, as Lisa showed, we don't want to work in silos. We want to build synergies, complementarities, collective efforts. We're all part of nature, of Mother Earth and her beautiful planet. And the separation of different topics, climate, ocean, biodiversity, is of course an artificial one that we as humans have created. But in order to address the challenges of climate change, these silos need to be broken down. But we all know that no one can do everything. Oh, no single person can do everything. But there's an urgency for mainstreaming of coherent action across biodiversity, ocean and climate change agendas. Ocean action is climate action, is biodiversity action. Discussions at the dialogue last year and highlighted in the summary report show, among other things, that at the UN level, there's an urgency to strengthen cooperation and linkages across relevant frameworks and agreements at the international, at the regional level. While at the national level, there's opportunities that could be achieved through supporting countries and for countries themselves to coordinate their action and reporting under the various and large range of processes and conventions across the UN system. So specifically under the Unfccc and under consideration at this very important COP in Glasgow, there's a number of ways forward that were identified at the Ocean Climate Change Dialogue, as well as discussed at an informal consultation which was held in June by the Chilean and UK COP presidencies. And some of the points raised for consideration are the following. Firstly, of course, to recognize the importance of strong ambition, strong climate change ambition, a reduction of fossil fuel emissions to protect the ocean and its ecosystems, as well as to recognize and understand all that the ocean does for us. There was also a need to strengthen ocean action under the UNFCCC process itself. So that means including a joined up inclusion of ocean-related adaptation mitigation action under all relevant work streams and constituted bodies. We have a very complicated process, but streamlining ocean under that process would go a long way to move us forward. And also, as I mentioned at the beginning, our team has coordinated the global stock take, and there's a place there also for the ocean to be considered. As well as after last year's ocean climate change dialogue, a number of parties are requesting this a regular ocean climate dialogue under our process. Another third point for consideration is that, as I mentioned, the strengthening of ocean climate action or ocean climate biodiversity action at national level, and for countries to communicate this under our process, they communicate this through nationally determined contributions and through national adaptation plans. Developing country parties, of course, need the support to implement action on adaptation mitigation. So there's obviously a recognition of the need to strengthen financial and other support and align international finance to support ocean climate action, climate finance, ocean finance, and vice versa. And last but no means least, and setting the stage for my dear colleague Vladimir, who's speaking after me, the importance of science, recognizing the vital work of the UN decade in this matter, the need two sides, to strengthen research and systematic observation of ocean and of coastal zones, in parallel with strengthening scientific underpinning of the action moving forward. With that, I would like to close. I would like to thank you very much. I wish everyone who in Glasgow a safe and successful COP, particularly those of you visiting the Virtual Ocean Pavilion, and I stand with you to connect everyone on the importance of connecting together on our incredible blue planet. Let's build forward bluer. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Joanna, and for your good use of the time as well. I think, again, the common denominator, the common thread that is coming through is the need for coordination and coherence. I recall when I used to be at the UN, we spoke about the UN delivering as one. And I believe what you have said is encapsulated in that phrase, that there need to be deliverables across all UN bodies to address climate change, and the importance of follow-up. Last year's Ocean Climate Conference should not be a one-off. There should be follow-up. And follow-up is important because the UN itself has called upon states to implement Sustainable Development Goal 14, the conservation and sustainable use of the resources of the oceans and seas, and delivering as one would help us to address this particular matter. But I'm happy that you have very neatly, without dropping the baton, you have passed it on so nicely, so efficiently to your colleague, Dr. Vladimir Ryabin, and Vladimir is the Executive Secretary of the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO. And Vladimir is a veteran, and I say veteran not only in terms of the length of his involvement, but the breadth and depth of involvement. So I'm honored to introduce you, Vladimir. Could speak now,
thank you very much, Eden. I hope you didn't refer to my gray hair only. Okay, so I would like to say the following. Indeed, Joanna set the stage for the discussion of ocean matters in the COP26. You know, ladies and gentlemen, I think we need to move into a single doable direction. And if it is only possible to make sure that the ocean matters are discussed as the priority for UNFCCC, that we are, I think, making a very important step towards solving part of the problem. Why I'm saying solving part of the problem? Because recently there was an assessment on the high-level panel that came up with this number: 20% of the carbon gap required to keep us within 1.5-degree warming may be achieved by ocean solutions. The second message I would like to send to you is that these solutions are really science intensive. And the United Nations system as a whole is working in different ways. But I would like to say that more and more cooperation between United Nations agencies is turning into a value chain. And there are some upstream and downstream elements of that value chain. And I'm representing the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO. We, I would say, are very much upstream in this system, because everything depends on ocean observations, on ocean research, and then it transforms into certain actions. So observations and research are upstream, and sometimes it's very difficult to justify that they are absolutely necessary for taking good decisions. So I would like to say that indeed much more interaction is now happening between ocean related agencies in the United Nations system, science community, general public. The ocean governance, apart from the UNCLOS conventional law of the sea, is still emerging. It will not probably list more than handful of countries that have ministers of the sea, but this is emerging, and this is what is supported by good science. I would like to inform you, and I think many of you know, about the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. This is a process that co-designs science, engages people in science, not just any science based on curiosity, but the science that leads to good decisions. And decisions will be, I think, informing actions in climate change domain and biodiversity domain, in ocean economy domain, which is absolutely key, and also in ethical domains. We already have, and more than 30 different programs under the decade, and already we're able to engage around $1 billion in this process. I would like to say this is not just ocean science that is a kind of hardcore science in terms of observations, modeling. We have some programs that are focusing on the role of on the leadership of women in the ocean decade and early career ocean professionals. We have a decade of ocean empathy, and we have also some regional work. So I think now there is at least a platform, and I would like to invite everyone to work with that platform, and because it has elements of co-design, has a forum, communities of practice. So basically, a lot of intellectual power is going now to mainstreaming ocean solutions in the many domains, including climate change domain. So that is basically the message I would like to convey to you. And the great ideas that we heard in the beginning may actually flourish if we combine forces. And indeed, the second and the last idea that I would like to share with you today is the idea that we need to move to integrated ocean management, sustainable ocean planning. It was clearly shown that it's possible to generate 6 times more food from the ocean. I'm pretty sure that Manuel is going to speak about that, maybe not in terms of the numbers, as 40 times more renewable energy on the basis of a relation of data, science, and also finances. So I think already there is a plan of saving the ocean, and that plan actually also has an element of decarbonization that may be really successful if we engage this into maritime special planning and other ways of managing the ocean sustainably. Please go to the oceandecade.org, Ocean Decade in one word, and you will learn a lot more than I was able to say in the time allotted to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vladimir, for your intervention. And one of two of the takeaways would be the issue of gender in addressing climate and the ocean, and the involvement of women. And I'm happy to hear that from your vantage point, you're saying that there has been greater coherence and coordination among UN bodies and so on. So one would hope that the coordination and cooperation of which you speak would be demonstrated in tangible action that the fisher folk in the Seychelles or the man in Asia or the Caribbean or Australia who depends on the ocean is able to see how the UN, through coordination and cooperation, is impacting positively with regard to the role of women and children, and they being part of the custodians of the ocean. Thank you very much. And again, yes?
Yeah, maybe just to quickly respond to Eden, I would like to say that this may be manifested in around, say, 7 or 80 maritime special plan, including transboundary, that is now progressing with the help of IOC around the world, including the areas that you mentioned. Thank you.
Always on the board, Vladimir, very well done. And because in the interest of time, I will cease my speech for now, but just to continue and introduce Professor Manuel Baranji. Manuel is a veteran as well, and as a consequence of being a veteran, he's the Director, Fisheries and Aquaculture Policy Resources Division of the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization. Manuel, let's hear from you, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairperson. Thank you for introducing me and for bringing the topic of of my intervention today so much into focus. The goal of this event is particularly to discuss how UN and global organizations can help build ocean resilience in the face of climate change. My primary intention today is to reflect on the fact that by ocean resilience, we include the resilience of ocean-dependent communities, which are part of the ocean ecosystem. I would like to remind us all that the Paris Agreement has an adaptation alongside its mitigation objective in a way that does not threaten food production. I would argue that while we are not very successful at mitigating climate change, at least we are focusing attention on it. When it comes to adaptation, I would argue that we are not giving it the attention it deserves. We need to recognize that helping ocean communities adapt to climate change is a crucial step in the fight against climate change. Ocean-dependent communities are not just part of the problem, they are also part of any successful solution. They are the often missed component in the ocean picture. We have a great opportunity ahead. As well as entering the decade of ocean science for sustainable development, 2022 is the International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture. The small-scale fisheries sector produces about half of all the fish we consume, and without it, the environmental impact of our land-based food systems would be much larger. So how do we help small-scale fisheries communities adapt? 3 things. First, by reviewing the applicable institutional and management fisheries frameworks and adjusting them to cope with the changing ocean, including developing co-management arrangements and regional management arrangements. Second, by assisting dependent communities develop livelihood adaptation alternatives, be that sustainably exploiting new resources or providing opportunities for diversification. And third, by managing risk and resilience through physical and barriers to floods and storms, new warnings or innovative community insurance systems. And above all, by engaging ocean-dependent communities as stewards and custodians of the oceans in the finding of solutions. We cannot tell people what to do, we have worked with them on what to do. Now, science has demonstrated already that adaptation is not a zero-sum game. It's not about weathering storms or minimizing impacts. It's all of the above, of course. But effective adaptation can also increase the benefits as long as we work with those that reap the benefits or the calamities of our action. But this is not achieved without steering, without guidance, and without coordination. And this is where we become very important. UN agencies and global organizations have a responsibility to work together on this, to be neutral but positive, to use science, bringing hope and innovation in the finding of solutions. FAO in particular has an adaptations program we are implementing around the world. We need like-minded organizations to work with us in supporting SBSTA's mandate. We are ready to help, and I think that the ocean community is ready to engage. Thank you very much, Chairperson. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Manuel. We are ready to help. I mean, you couldn't be more pointed than that. And help in what way? You've identified some ways, and you have said that adaptation is not given the type of treatment that it should be given. And one hopes that we'll continue to see the FA doing more. Maybe in the question and answer segment, you'll tell me how, in the face of the declining fish stocks in so many maritime zones, which could affect the human right to work of some fisherfolk, what the FAO is doing regarding fishery subsidies. But we'll deal with that perhaps in the question and answer time, because that's a critically important matter to address. But thank you very much, Manuel. And Manuel is now giving way to Dr. Joseph Appiot. And Joseph is the coordinator of Marine, Coastal, and Island Biodiversity of the Secretariat of the Convention on Biodiversity. I've known Joseph for a while, and I hope Joseph doesn't disappoint this morning, because he never disappoints. Joseph?
Thank you, Eden. Thank you for those kind words, and I certainly hope to live up to your expectations in my remarks. Well, I've been given a few minutes here just to talk a little bit about the importance and some thoughts on UN collaboration and coordination on these issues of oceans and climate, and from our side, biodiversity. So as many of you know, last year we reached the end point of the Aichi biodiversity targets, and negotiations are currently underway to develop the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, which will contain a new set of global goals and targets for biodiversity, and will, if all goes well, be adopted next year at our COP15, CBD COP15 in April and May. Now, in looking back at the Aichi targets, we know that one of the key reasons that we failed to fully achieve the Aichi targets is that our responses have too often been split across multiple silos, and that we haven't yet effectively leveraged linkages across oceans, biodiversity, and climate at the scale that we need to. We do see a lot of progress, of course, but the scale it significantly needs to be scaled up, this collaboration. But what's important in the sense of collaboration and coordination from our perspective is that we need to focus on collaboration where it's relevant to the mandate of the respective agencies and processes, and especially where the combined attention and the combined competencies of different UN agencies and global processes add value and are greater than the sum of the parts. And finally, where the collaboration can support tangible action. We need to move past rhetoric and simple words and move towards where this actually can support implementation. A great example of the type of a promising issue of collaboration across UN agencies from our perspective in the CBD is on issues like nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based adaptation. So these are areas of work that obviously are centrally relevant to both the UNFCCC and the CBD. A lot of technical work going on these two fronts, and a lot of opportunities for us to scale up our joint work on these issues, and also to input to our respective processes. We have to remember that our respective state parties, the governments that have signed up to these conventions, are the same. But many of them actually can be very easily overwhelmed with following many different areas of work and many different streams of work under different processes. And this is especially the case for small island developing states that often have limited human resources to follow these different processes. So an important question is how can we deliver more streamlined and implementation-oriented support and guidance to the governments rather than exhausting them? In some cases, this can mean joint work. In other cases, it may mean that it's simply best for some agencies to support the work of another agency rather than trying to jump into the issue as well and further confusing and exhausting governments with many more workshops and technical documents. But finally, we also need to remember that the work of UN agencies, and especially convention bodies like the UNFCCC and the CBD, is fully driven by the governments, by our state parties. This means that governments can play a huge role in driving UN agency collaboration, telling us explicitly and exactly what they want us to collaborate on. It also means that it's up to the governments to follow through with implementation in a coordinated and coherent way, which unfortunately doesn't happen enough. So my final point here is that this coordination is absolutely essential, and it's something that we are making progress on, but it also really needs to be underpinned by coordination at the national level across ministries, across agencies, and it has to be reflected also in implementation on the ground. So thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. I said you would not disappoint, and you have not disappointed us this morning. I like the emphasis on the point on duplicity and a plethora of so many UN bodies or treaty bodies. And I recall as a former delegate, the question of treaty implementation fatigue. But if you're saying that there is an element of fatigue, Joseph, and duplication, you tell us as well what the CBD, is doing in terms of capacity building to assist developing countries implement the obligations under that convention as a means of dealing with adaptation and mitigation of climate change. But I will leave that for the question and answers section, because Frederick is ready to run. And Frederick Hagg is the head of the Office for the London Convention and Protocol and Ocean Affairs. He works in the Marine Environment Division and also in the International Maritime Organization Division. And Frederick as well is a very distinguished international public servant. Frederick?
Thank you very much, Eden. And may I just say that some great points from the previous speakers before as well. So allow me to just give some points from the perspective of the IMO on this. So as the UN specialized agency responsible for regulating shipping and the dumping of waste at sea, IMO recognizes the need to act decisively on climate change. And as you're probably aware, shipping is indispensable to global trade and sustainable development. Like any other sector, the shipping industry is fully committed to reducing its carbon footprint, and action is underway. Most recently, earlier this year, IMO adopted amendments on the GHG short-term measures for shipping, as well as a work plan on the development of mid-term measures. And later this month, the same member states that are negotiating at COP26 will initiate the revision of IMO's initial GHG strategy, expected to reflect the outcome of COP26. But IMO's work goes way beyond shipping as well. As the Secretariat for the London Convention and Protocol mentioned previously, it's also the forum where climate change mitigation issues such as carbon capture and storage in subseabed geological formations and ocean interventions, also referred to as marine geoengineering, are discussed, but most importantly, regulated globally. As a specialized agency, IMO is an integral part of the UN system, and as the regulator of one of the biggest users of the ocean, it plays a major part of the governance of our ocean. The discussions and decisions that are taking place in one UN agency such as IMO are not taking place in isolation, and there is constant dialogue with the other actors in this field. And the actions that follow from decisions taken at IMO are implemented at the national level by the same member states that make up other regulatory bodies as well as this COP. In this vein, it's imperative that the agreed framework such as treaties, amendments, and regulations also translate into national actions. To strengthen synergies and to facilitate ocean climate dialogue, I also wanted to point out to the fact that we have a number of existing structures for cooperation that are serving us also quite well, such as the Joint Group of Experts on the Scientific Aspects of Marine Environmental Protection, GESAMP, and UN Oceans, to mention a few. And these mechanisms are also important for delivery of the 2030 Agenda, and not least the Decade of Ocean Science to support the sustainable development. But finally, I would like to pick up on what several others have said, and that is just to emphasize the crucial importance for technical cooperation and assistance, not least with respect to the topic under discussion today. And in all our work at IMO, we pay particular attention to the needs of developing countries, especially SIDS and LDCs. And much of our technical cooperation work is carried out in partnership with other organizations, both within the UN and beyond. So those are a few thoughts from my end. I look forward to the discussion to follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Frederick. And it's useful when an IMO official mentions that the IMO is not only about shipping. I'm happy to hear that the IMO is dealing with matters related to carbon capture and storage. And later on in the discussion, you're going to tell us how the IMO is assisting developing countries, in particular the most vulnerable among them sits in addressing carbon capture and storage. But we are coming to the end of the presentations, and I want to now go to Dr. Carlos Garcia Soto. Carlos is the coordinator of the group of the experts of the UN regular process on the assessment of the world oceans, and is also a member of the Spanish National Research Council. I know from my previous experiences how much quality work has gone into the assessment of the world's oceans, and Carlos could let us know how is that assisting in tackling climate change. Carlos?
Oh, thank you for your kind words, Eden. I have very good memories of our interaction together some time ago on BBNJ. So I'm very pleased to meet you here again. So in this very short intervention of 2-3 minutes, I will explain very briefly what we do in the regular process and how we collaborate with other UN bodies. The objective of the regular process is to assess the state of the marine environment, including socioeconomic aspects, and to provide the best available information to strengthen decision-making at all levels. The major output, as you all know, of the UN regular process is the World Ocean Assessment. There has been a first assessment, or WA1, published in 2016. This is a very young assessment. The second assessment, or WA2, has been recently launched in April this year, and now the regular process has initiated its third cycle that covers the years 2021-2025. In addition to the major assessments, WA1 and WA2, the regular process has published scientific briefs or technical abstracts containing the key information of the World Ocean Assessment about key topics. The technical abstracts of WA1 focus on 3 major themes. BBNJ, this is the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. The second theme was the Sustainable Development Goals, and the third were the impacts of climate change. This answers the question about what we do, but the key question of this panel is how to strengthen cooperation and collaboration among relevant UN bodies. The UN bodies and panels have been invited by the regular process and the group of experts to propose experts for the pool of experts that elaborates the World Ocean Assessment itself. These bodies and panels have also been invited to the scoping exercise that prepares the outline and the content of the assessment. And very recently, we have invited FAO, IOC, UNEP, CBD, IPCC, IPBES, and IUCN to provide their thoughts and their inputs about the scientific briefs of WA2 that we are preparing now. These future briefs that will be finalized by the end of this year will extract the key information of the World Ocean Assessment 2 that is relevant for major programs, like, for example, the UN Decade of Ocean Science, the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, and the Sustainable Development Goals of Agenda 2030. And information that is relevant for major topics, marine biodiversity and ocean climate change. I would like to finalize in the same way as I started. The objective of the regular process and the World Ocean Assessments is to provide the best available scientific information for decision-making at all levels. We will do that in collaboration with all the UN bodies that are interested in this work. And what we hope now, very especially in the context of this COP26, is that this information allows for decisive and urgently needed decision-making at all levels. Thank you, everyone, and I am at your disposal for any question.
Thank you very much, Carlos, and for your brevity as usual, but clinical examination of the topic. The issue of the best available scientific information coming out of the regular assessment of the state of the marine environment. So if we are dealing with adaptation, if we are dealing with mitigation, if if we are dealing with coral bleaching, if we are dealing with ocean acidification, which affects the livelihoods, if we want of people, if we want to codify some things into a binding, legally binding treaty, we need to rely on not just scientific information, but the best available scientific information. And I know that is what you all are doing in terms of the regular process of the state of the oceans, and you collaborate and you provide feedback. I remember working with you in the BBNJ days and that sort of thing, and that's important. All right. But colleagues, we have heard from the panel participants as well. And we have heard from the UN bodies, we have heard from others. And now it's time for question and answers. And I have seen some already in the chat, and I've seen some in the question and answer segment. I think one of the first ones I saw, and I'm not being biased here because he might be my countryman, is from Dr. James Hospitalis. And James's question is, what practical ideas do the panelists have for how to join up the silos, whether between UN organizations or public, private, or government civil society organizations? We have said that they sometimes work in silos. A number of you have said, no, there's collaboration, coordination, including what Frederick said, what Joseph said, and what Vladimir said, and so on. But James, Dr. Hospitalis is asking us what practical ideas do you have in terms of bringing these agencies together to avoid them working in silos, whether the UN, public, private partnerships, or civil society organizations, right? And then after addressing that question, we'll see what other questions or comments are there. Okay, the floor is open, panelists. I see Joseph is off the track, like Usain Bolt. Joseph, yes? Yeah?
Yes, happy to address this. I see others had their hands up as well, but I'm happy to jump in first. Thank you. Well, I think there's many different ways that this can be achieved, but I think an important aspect, and this was touched on earlier, is the money, is linking the coordination and collaboration or some way, or at least, and especially in terms of implementation, is through the funding mechanisms. So, I mean, speaking in particular with our body, the CBD, and the UNFCCC, there's a lot of opportunities to scale up both in the GEF, the Global Environment Facility, and the GCF, the Green Climate Fund, to instill in those bodies, in the screening criteria and how they're selecting what they're funding and what their priorities are, to instill these kinds of linkages in those priorities, in those funding priorities, and as requirements for the projects that are being funded. So I think, putting it there in terms of where it actually has to, where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, that is a key leverage point. And I think it probably is not that difficult. As we often say in the biodiversity world, good biodiversity management will be good for climate, and vice versa. So I think, those are some key low-hanging fruits there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Joseph. And we go to Vladimir, followed by Manuel.
Thank you very much, Eden. Indeed, there must be some overarching idea, and I think just stopping the silos is not it's not an idea in itself. It's just a deficiency that needs to be removed. But an idea should be present, and I think there is, significant progress in understanding how we can move forward with a lot of ocean matters, and that idea is sustainable ocean planning. Sustainable ocean planning involves the whole value chain, from science to actions to policies. It also, of course, should be backed by capacity development and also ethical considerations. So I think we are now on the verge of unrolling a set of ideas of how we can implement sustainable ocean planning. But there is one thing that in that planning that may be also addressing the needs of the world in terms of climate change, because this is also a fantastic chance to reduce carbon emissions and also find other ocean-related solutions related to biodiversity, related to carbon, related to vulnerability and the resilience of societies. So that's the great idea, and I think it is possible, having this idea in mind, to plan activities of all United Nations organizations, bring together science in the co-design process. And I would like to invite you to participate in that, I would say, revolution in ocean science. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Vladimir, Manuel, followed by Frederick.
Yes, thank you. I would like to comment on that as well. First, to say that the issue of silos is not exclusive to the marine environment, to the ocean environment. The issue of silos applies in all areas of human endeavor. And it is something that is difficult because even the structure of the world is into these sort of silos. We have governments, we have ministries, and they all have their own responsibilities. And when it comes to the UN, as my colleagues from other UN agencies know, our member states always try to make sure that we do not extend beyond our mandate. So we are almost forced to operate on that silo manner. But the thing that is very important is that all of us in the UN system know that we cannot operate alone. And so we are always trying to establish the connections that make our work easier and more successful. And as a scientist or as a civil servant, I've always experienced the ocean communities much more ready to work together than in other sort of land-based communities. So I think that the UN agencies work together very well, and we work together very well despite the fact that member countries want to make sure that we extend from our mandates, and that is the cleverness that we have, in trying to find the mechanisms to break those silos without upsetting the member countries who really are the ones that tell us what to do.
Muchas gracias, Manuel. Now we go to Frederick.
Thank you, and of course, very well said by Joe, Vladimir, and Manuel already. And maybe the one thing I could add is that I think that we all see the importance of working together. We all have our mandates as we have set by the member states, and I think we're actually quite good at that dialogue around the boundaries and to work together to address these. But maybe we need to become better and showing that as well, and showing the success stories of where we actually do work together, so that it's a bit more clear that we are perhaps not as bound by the silos as people think. Thank you.
Thank you, Frederick. Sean, you have any comments? Anything to add? Okay, not at this stage. But I'm seeing here in the chat section, Julika Tribuket, and I apologize if I pronounce your name improperly. She has something directed to Joseph, and she said, I think reducing duplication is key and should also include reporting requirements. Enhanced synergies on this can and should be well supported by science. Joseph, you're on the witness box now. You want to testify on as to the effect?
No, thank you to Julika. That's a fantastic point and something that resonates very well, I think probably with many of us here. Under the CBD, our parties are required to submit national reports. And this can be quite burdensome for many parties to do this. So I wholeheartedly agree that alignment in reporting requirements is absolutely essential. We do have some progress in that vein. We actually, a great example of this, recently, within the past years with our great colleagues at FAO, we were able to better align some of our reporting mechanisms on Aichi Target 6 and on the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries. So we saw very clearly that the elements that Aichi Target 6 on sustainable fisheries was speaking to, that we were missing so much information on in terms of what countries were doing in terms of management plans and reducing bycatch and all of those things. Our FAO colleagues raised the point that, look, they're already reporting on all this information under the FAO, the Code of Conduct questionnaire. So why don't we just make a few little tweaks to what kind of questions we're asking, and we're both getting the information that we both want. So that was a great example of how we were able to sort of seek some alignment across these different processes and also reduce the burdens of countries having to separately report to different processes. Another great way that we're doing this right now under the CBD is currently, as I said, we're developing a post-2020 global biodiversity framework. We're putting more focus now on the indicator work up front. And what we're especially doing there is looking to where there's existing reporting mechanisms and existing indicators already out there. So not creating a whole new suite of indicators, but looking at how we can benefit from the work that is going on in SDG reporting, on FAO reporting, on many other processes, and importantly, tapping into the national statistical commissions and all of this work that's already ongoing, so that we make things easier, clearer for our countries, so that not only can they have more time to focus on implementation rather than reporting, but that they actually can know upfront and across the different ministries have common things that they're going to have to report on. And that again, being a basis for them, not only to work together on reporting, but also work together on implementation. So thank you for that point, Julika. Yeah.
Thank you, Joseph. I see Manuel, you want the floor? Manuel?
No, sorry, I didn't ask for the floor.
Okay,
I think it was Lisa.
Lisa, yes?
Yes, hi. I sort of have a question for everybody that relates to this, and that is, how can climate change be more mainstreamed into the activities of each organization, especially in the design of sensitive and protected areas? For example, how can it be mainstreamed into the CBD's EBSTAs, into the FAO, RFMO's vulnerable marine ecosystem designations, into the International Seabed Authority's protected areas, into the BBNJ deliberations about marine protections? And this is really just a question, and into the London Protocol's protections, relative to geoengineering. I mean, it applies across the board. So really, this is my question to everybody else.
A very important one is that. Colleagues, you have heard Lisa, you may want to respond in any particular order, it doesn't matter. And if I don't see any order, I will call on someone to respond. I see Frederick has a very important smile on his face. So Frederick, I think you want to go first, right? Frederick?
No, not really, but thank you. Well, that's a good question. I mean, if you speak of IMO, we already do have some tools at our hand, which, for example, would be the designation of emission control areas under MARPOL Annex 6, which is already in effect, and where we have some of these already around the world. There are also, for example, you could think of possibilities under the particularly sensitive sea areas concept, where you can build on any existing IMO instrument to declare an area in need of greater protection. And there are clear links there as well with the identification of areas under the EBSAS process, which you could build on perhaps even more than what we do now. And so there are opportunities. The one area there is perhaps not currently not a possibility to designate specific areas as such would be under the LCLP, but there you already have a different kind of procedure, which I think is quite solid in its own right when it comes to providing the environmental impact assessment and possible permits for various issues through those instruments. Thank you.
Vladimir.
Thank you, Eden. I would like to say that under the Decade of Ocean Science, now on the 15th of October, we issued a second call for decade actions that is focusing on marine pollution, on health of ecosystems, and ocean and climate nexus. So in principle, we would like to seek contributions to the design of science that will be contributing to elements that are important for example, for CBD, that will be important also for IMO. And indeed, sometimes the system in which we are working and living is non-linear, and because of that, I think we once again I am coming back to the issue of value chain, and I think one of the important vision elements over the decade is qualities of the ocean that we like to have. One of these qualities is accessible ocean. That means data that is authoritative and that also is verifiable and also creates responsibility in the system. And if we are able to communicate that message on the basis of the good science that also gives a platform for good decisions, it is much easier for our colleagues who indeed are suffering sometimes in the silo-oriented environment to achieve better results. Once again, the issue is we can start managing the ocean, and that will be having implications for biodiversity, climate, and the issue is approaching this as a value chain in a non-linear fashion. That's the answer. Sorry, a bit theoretical, but you know, it's surprising it may work.
Yeah, theoretical is the foundation in many instances. Manuel, followed by Carlos.
Yes, thank you. I'll be very brief on this, and I think that Lisa has a very good point. You know, how do we mainstream? There's so much that we need to make that we're part of. And I think that it was quite important is to make sure that we only mainstream when it has been, when the point has been made that it has to be included throughout. When it comes to climate change, we're still not there. There's many places where we need to come with the message of climate change from the beginning, not mainstream through the others, but as a specific objective and a specific problem to solve. And when it comes to RFMOs or RFBs or any other body that I'm part of, I always bring climate change as a special element. And my message always is, there's no bigger incentive to manage fisheries properly than climate change. You know, if we needed one more, climate change is the best message in terms of understanding that we need to manage resources properly, and so that's our way of mainstreaming it through the management dialogue and narrative.
Thank you very much, Manuel. Carlos, this one.
Thank you. Our main product is an assessment, it's a book. So climate change has been a priority in this assessment from the very beginning. And the proof is that when we are preparing technical abstract or scientific briefs of the World Ocean Assessment that tends to be tremendously big, we're always selecting climate change as one of the major topics. Other important aspect I would like to highlight is that when we're preparing the assessment, the chapters on climate change, we contact the authors of the IPCC, and therefore we have a single voice between what we do in an integrated way, in a more summarized way, and what they do more specifically. And I would like just to connect this question of climate change with the previous one of silos. I'm not representing here Dualos, but the group of experts is like a byproduct of Dualos to some extent. I am aware, and probably you already are, that there is this coordinating place or coordinating meeting called UN Oceans, where all the UN bodies working on the oceans meet regularly or from time to time. So this is an aspect in which the silos are connected and can be a place or a meeting in which common topics, like for example, climate change, that is defining our time and our generation or the future generations can be debated jointly. This is just a vague idea. That means the existence of UN oceans is a very good sign that the silos don't exist or exist less than are thought. And there are places where it's a place where all the voices can be here together, and there can be some interchange of opinions in this aspect of climate change and others. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I had a question earlier on, and I said I would come back to it. I want to go to Manuel and the question of climate change and the impact of climate change on fisheries and the declining or the depleting fish stock in many maritime zones. And the issue of notwithstanding these anthropogenic effects of climate change on fish stock, we still continue to have subsidies which are injurious to the fishing industry in so many countries. And the question, Manuel, is what is the FAA doing in order to address that as it tackles climate change? Because they are linked. And then I want to go back to Bernadette Snow, my colleague from One Ocean Hub, regarding the issue of human rights and climate change, and what is the hub zeroing on? Do we see that, for example, the human rights of children or women are being impacted more negatively as far as climate change is impact on oceans is concerned? But Manuel, you followed by Bernadette. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Eden. So early on, we were talking about how UN agencies work together, and I mentioned the issue of mandates, and this is quite important because countries expect certain mandates from certain agencies. The issue of subsidies is discussed through the World Trade Organization, so through the WTO. And FAO, the role of FAO is provide advice to members and to the WTO on the importance of removing subsidies that are damaging to the environment and to the resources. So FAO, for example, has been sending officers to the WTO for long periods of time to help the Secretariat develop proposals for countries to be discussing, to discuss. And we then follow this up with a number of meetings, regional meetings and multilateral meetings to tell countries the consequences of particular subsidies in terms of fisheries management. And we continue to do that with WTO. Technical advice on the impacts of certain subsidies, and then countries make the decisions at the discussions through WTO, and I feel very optimistic that in the next round of the WTO there will be a solution to those subsidies. It's an example of interagency collaboration that very often goes under the radar because countries want us to engage in our own particular mandates. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manuel. And colleagues, when you're doing it so well, time just runs away with you. Bernadette, Dr. Bernadette Stowe will reply, and then she'll also give final comments as well in terms of her position at One Ocean Hub. And then we'll have Vladimir, Dr. Ryabin, and then I will give some concluding remarks, and we'll say good evening or good night or good afternoon, as the case may be.
Thank you so much, Eden, for asking that question. And in the essence of time, I think I'll keep it very short. Climate is a human rights violation. And if we continue doing what we're doing and not working together and not tackling climate change and not mainstreaming it, we are going to be actually infringing on human rights. So even as researchers, UN bodies, managers, governments, state coordinators are actually, we're infringing on human rights. And obviously, the more vulnerable, the children, communities are impacted largely. And as already mentioned through some, often those are the voices not included in climate negotiations, in decision-making, in working together towards solutions. And it's very important that we consider that we need to do a bottom-up approach as well in some of these negotiations and think of the fora where everyone is at. That is my short answer, knowing that we've got 3 minutes left to wrap up, as we have to stick to time for these live events. And I think my take-home message from the interventions and responses that I can see is that, yes, there are silos, that this is just a symptom that needs to be addressed, according to Vladimir. That's something that, we need to put aside. We need to take cognizance that there are already interventions within the UN to work better together. They just need to communicate this in a way of better examples of where it is so that, we can see these interventions and how they work. So measure them where they are working together. I think there is still quite a lot of work to do. And that's based even on Lisa's question where she added at the end, how can we mainstream climate change? So that's, it's still a growing question, and I think a growing debate that we need to take forward in our discussions throughout COP and even post-COP. And how can we work together to mainstream and to tackle all the different aspects as a result of climate change? I will now give over to Vladimir so that he has a minute and then you have a minute to close.
Thank you very much, Bernadette and Eden. My message will be also short. and would like also to capitalize on the presentations, including the one that was given by Lisa on the readiness of countries and scientists to ensure certain commitments. COP26 is going to struggle. And I think it's our duty to help COP to find solutions. And ocean is a solution for biodiversity, for climate, for 20% of the carbon gap, and working together on the basis of the inputs of science, managers, upstream and downstream, I think we can make a big contribution to success of COP. And this is what is the message I think we need to take to the negotiators, so they would know and try to also include ocean in the main discussion of the COP26. Thank you.
Thank you, Vladimir. Colleagues, participants, wherever in the world you are, it was my honor and privilege to moderate this important dialogue on behalf of One Ocean Hub in my capacity as chairman of the advisory board of One Ocean Hub. I believe the contributions were rich, they were robust, and it allows us to have a better understanding as to how the United Nations, acting through multilateral diplomatic action, legally binding treaties, and other soft law instruments, could achieve its objective if there is sufficient political will of the group of 200 plus. Yesterday, the G20 met in Italy. We are the G200 plus, and we should make a difference as we continue to build momentum in COP26. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. Thank you for your participation. Take care for now.